Before we begin, please be aware that this episode contains discussions of violent crimes, including murder and assault, and there could be references to sex work and gangs. The content may be distressing or triggering for some viewers, therefore viewer discretion is advised. Hello everyone and welcome back. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who've watched, who've liked, and especially those who've subscribed to the channel. I know the numbers may be small compared to other channels, but I genuinely appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch and listen. This is a real passion of mine, and your positive feedback and interactions really drive me to keep going, so please do continue to interact. Whether it's sharing your thoughts on episodes or giving feedback on the content, I'm always really keen to hear what you think. Now, let's get into today's case. Welcome back to London's Dark Archives, where we delve deep into London's most infamous and unsolved cases. In today's episode, we're stepping away from the Jack the Ripper murders and focusing on one of the lesser known victims of the Whitechapel Murders, Rose Mylett. This case raises the question, was Rose a victim of foul play, or did she die accidentally? While her death is not officially linked to Jack the Ripper, many at the time believed the Ripper was back. We'll explore the known details about her tragic end, the police investigation, and the public's reaction. The death of Rose Mylett occurred at a time when the East End of London was still reeling from the horrors of Jack the Ripper. Just weeks after the brutal murder of Mary Jane Kelly, tensions was high. While the area had seen its fair share of crime long before Jack had ever arrived, the fear and unease gripping the streets was unparalleled. People believed that no one was safe, and any new death of a woman sent shockwaves through the community. It's important to understand that the press had played a huge role in amplifying the fear. With each report, public perception grew more frenzied, and stories of Jack went out of stuff a legend. It wouldn't have taken much for EastEnders to lump Rose Mylett's death into Jack's body count. Born in 1862, Rose Mylett was about 29 years old at the time of her death. Her life had not been easy. Like many women in the East End, she was forced to survive in a rough environment, taking odd jobs and relying on prostitution at times to get by. Her drinking habits were well known, and alcohol likely played a role in her interactions and relationships. On the night of December 20th, 1888, Rose Mylett was last seen alive in the company of some men at various public houses. She had been drinking, as was common for her, and moved between pubs throughout the night. Witnesses described her as respectably dressed, a sharp contrast to her humble circumstances. This discrepancy in how she was described before her death versus the speculation around her lifestyle after it adds another layer of mystery to her case. Rose's body was found in Clark's Yard off Popular High Street, an area not as infamous as Whitechapel, but still known for its poverty and crime. Clark's Yard was a dark, narrow alleyway, similar to many of the back streets that made up East London at the time. These kind of alleys were a breeding ground for petty theft, assault, and worse. Rose was discovered early in the morning on December 20th, her body lying face up with no apparent signs of struggle or injury. The area around Clark's Yard was filled with pubs, markets, and tight-knit communities. Residents were used to seeing people slumped in the streets, especially after a night of drinking. However, Rose's death raised some immediate questions. Was this another murder? Or was it a tragic accident involving intoxication or misadventure? Let's take a closer look at what was found. The initial belief by those who found her was that Rose had been strangled. However, upon closer inspection by the police and later a medical examination, things become less clear. There were no obvious marks on her body to indicate a violent struggle, and some even speculated that she may have died from asphyxiation due to a drunken fall or perhaps even alcohol poisoning. The coroner's inquest is where the real debate began. Dr. George Baxter Phillips, who also worked on other Whitechapel murder cases, conducted the post-mortem. While there was a slight mark around Rose's neck, it weren't consistent with a violent strangulation. This left open the possibility that her death could have been accidental, perhaps caused by her collar tightening as she fell. But others weren't so sure. To many, the timing of her death, so soon after Mary Jane Kelly, seemed too coincidental. Was Jack back? Was this another method of killing, more subtle and less obvious? The public was divided, and the press latched onto these uncertainties to feed the growing hysteria. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the police force was under immense pressure. Sir Charles Warren, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, had resigned in November 1888 amid public criticism over his handling of the Ripper case. His departure left a leadership void, and his replacement, James Monroe, inherited an anxious and demoralised force. There was a growing belief that the police weren't doing enough to catch the killer, and this added further scrutiny to every new case that emerged. With Rose Mylett's death, the police were quick to state there was no connection to Jack the Ripper, but the damage had already been done. The press and public were always looking for the next Ripper victim, and the authorities' reassurances did little to calm their fears. The newspapers at the time were full of speculation, with headlines like, "Is Jack back?" and "Another Whitechapel murder," fanned the flames of suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing Rose the night before her death, but the accounts were conflicting. Some said she was drunk and unsteady on her feet, while others described her as composed. What everyone agreed on that she was last seen with a man, but unfortunately this man was never identified, which again leads to further questions. Could he have been responsible for her death? If so, was he simply an opportunist, or was he part of a larger, more terrifying narrative? The lack of concrete evidence and the confusing autopsy results make it difficult to come to any clear conclusion. Was Rose's death an accident? A misfortune brought on by heavy drinking? Or was she the victim of a more sinister act? All these questions lingered, but with no solid proof. The case slowly faded from the public's attention. Let's take a closer look at the area and the press speculation around the time of Rose's death. Clark's Yard was just one of many narrow, dirty alleyways that crisscross East London at the time. The nearby pubs were frequented by locals and travellers alike. These watering holes were often the centre of community life, but were also places where people would meet unsavoury characters. Poplar High Street, not far from where Rose was found, was a bustling hub full of markets, shops and businesses. But it also had its share of trouble. The markets nearby, such as the well-known Chris Street Market, which is still there today, were full of vendors hawking their goods, but also teeming with petty criminals and drunks. It was a lively but dangerous place to navigate, especially for women on their own. Now in this regard, this area hasn't changed. I regularly go to Chris Street Market and I visit the pubs nearby. There's an underlying feeling of danger that is more present here than in most other areas of London. Violence is never far away. The murder of Mary Jane Kelly had drawn massive media attention, and by the time Rose Mylett died, the press was still hungry for sensational stories. The Whitechapel Murders had become a media circus, with the papers competing to outdo each other with headlines and theories. The news of Rose's death, while not immediately tied to Jack the Ripper, was another chance for the papers to stoke fear and intrigue. As always, sensationalism reigned supreme, and the idea that Jack might still be lurking in the shadows was more than enough to sell newspapers. The public was in a state of heightened fear and fascination, unable to let go of the idea that the Ripper could strike again at any moment. In my opinion, Rose Mylett's death is one of the most puzzling in the Whitechapel series. While it's easy to see why some thought it was a Ripper victim, the evidence just don't add up. The lack of clear signs of violence suggests their death may have just been an accident. However, it's also possible that someone took advantage of her vulnerable state, strangling her in a way that left few traces. What's fascinating to me is that the public reaction to her death mirrors what we see today. Sensationalism, media frenzy, and a desire for stories to connect can sometimes obscure the truth. In the case of Rose Mylett, we may never know whether her death was part of the Ripper's reign of terror or simply a tragic accident. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will continue to unravel the Whitechapel Murders and uncover the stories of those who were lost in this dark chapter of London's history. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these episodes. And remember to stay safe and lock your doors.